Hello, I'm Toby. I like Doctor Who, and I'm about to watch a story chosen for me by a friend with the aim of mining it for positives in order to guess what their favourite things about this particular adventure are. So join me, watch along with me if you like, or just listen as I chat to you, offer facts, opinions and observations, but mainly try to get us to those special planes that Doctor Who takes us to, those happy times and places. You're listening to Happy Times and Places, a positive Doctor Who episode commentary with me, Toby Hadoke. Let's meet our special guest.
Hello, my name's Chris Boyle and I'm a full-time A-level law teacher and an incredibly part-time comedian and podcaster. The story that I've chosen is The Day of the Daleks, and the reason I've chosen that is because I do have problems with the Third Doctor. He should be my favourite. He's played by John Pertwee, he wears velvet jackets, he does incredibly complicated fight sequences whilst holding a glass of whiskey, and yet more often than not I find him a bit pompous and a bit superior, and it gets on my nerves. So I'm going to see if I can find the positives in a Third Doctor story.
Well, welcome to Happy Times and Places. I've got no idea how this is going to go. You're watching Doctor Who with me, either as a video, possibly alongside the episodes, or as an audio, again, possibly alongside the episodes. I guess you'll work out how you like to do it best, which might be not at all. And I'll work out how to do it best, but how to do it best. But I guess that's all part of the journey that we're on, seeing as we're going nowhere in any other sense. I, like you, I'm sure, are currently in lockdown. So that wasn't entirely a stumble-free introduction, was it? Well, that's how it's going to be. This is unrehearsed and off the top of my head, and let's see what happens. That blather has hopefully given you a chance to line up Day of the Daleks, Episode 1, however you are watching it. I am watching it on the official BBC DVD, which is available, and you should buy. And here we are. We're going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Well, there was quite a gap between me doing that at the start of the episode, but I guess that will happen. Welcome. I'm watching Day of the Daleks. A story that, like many Doctor Who stories, I first discovered through the Target novel, and it's one of the better Target novels because Terence Dicks, who was later doing them, I think, once every other day, was one of a bevy of writers and seemed to have a bit more time and a higher word count. And it's a great book. Opens with a character called Moni, who we see later as Monia, on some sort of journey, but not here. This opens, I think, better for the TV series in the haunted house. So it's quite nice. It looks like it's going to be. Well, you get the idea that it's. Or certainly, maybe I'm misremembering, and from the book you get the sort of mystery that has he seen a ghost, and actually it's a ghost from the future. Wilfred Carter here as Styles, one of many pompous bureaucrats we see in Doctor Who of this era, although he is a pompous bureaucrat who is apparently the man who is going to save the world. And I quite like that he's he's actually no saint. And this is Tim Condren, who's a stuntman, actually. We're out of ghost story territory immediately. That's a man in fatigues, so and with a futuristic gun. So, and it was curious. I remember it being slightly confusing because I think the book very early on, or this part of it, starts with a gorilla running through the forest or running through the grounds, and it's gorilla, Guer. But it confused me because it had the Ogrons on the cover, who look like gorillas. And I mean, I was reading these books before I was ready to, really, because I was so fascinated by Doctor Who. I read books that had loads of words and situations I didn't fully understand, which meant I then read the books again later, and perhaps again later still. And I remember not quite understanding the difference between a gorilla and a gorilla until I said to Mum, I thought gorilla was spelt like that. And she went, oh yes, a gorilla is a sort of, soldier freedom fighter type thing. So I learnt a new word. I'm not quite sure what, at the age of however I was, how useful the word gorilla was going to be to me. But nonetheless, I at least knew what it meant should I ever be needed to fulfill the role of a gorilla. I like Joe's costume, but I'm a tie wearer. We do crave things in our own image, don't we? Narcissists that we are, he said, doing a podcast where all the talking is done by him. Now, she's so magical, isn't she, Katie? Now, I'm going to have to be good here, because left to my own devices, I would always choose moments from actors. I'm not going to be able to tell you where things were filmed, or locations are not my thing. Buy Richard Bignell's location book. But I will probably bore on about obscure things about the actors, because although because in the book, this scene here where the Doctor and Joe meet each other and have a chat is a bit of a sort of timey-wimey thing, and was supposed to be a sort of witty bookend to the story, so that we got this scene again at the end, but from the other perspective. And it's interesting because they've got the yellow CSO cloth there, but they haven't replaced the background. Now, I'm not sure if they intended to, but you could, in the earlier shot, you could see the floor, which I think did cause a row between the designer and the David Marskoff-Jones and the director Paul Bernard. And I know Paul Bernard had done an experimental session to try, because CSO, color separation overlay, is also known as blue screen, although I think I'm right in saying that this is the first time yellow had been used, which means that Joe can wear a denim dress or skirt, because blue would normally disappear with blue screen. So just no yellow clothes for Joe this week. But actually there's no CSO in operation there, because they didn't replace the background. I don't know if they intended to, but I certainly know there was a problem because they didn't paint the floor yellow or colour the floor, which meant they couldn't do... which I think meant they couldn't do the keying. And yes, there was certainly a row between... And I think Paul Bernard had a background in design. He's certainly a very visual... This is his first Doctor Who, and he's a very visually interesting director. He brings lots of sort of jazzy crossings between scenes, and some bits in the future that we'll see later. There's some really experimental and exciting stuff. This is a nice location, and Tim Condren is back again. He pops up a few times in Doctor Who. He even gets a line in the Web of Fear, because he's one of the soldiers in the Covent Garden fight, because they're all, I think, pre-Havoc, but stuntmen. And I think he goes, "They're coming, sir!" or something like that. And that's a funny old running shot. Anyway, and he got acting parts. I saw him not that long ago in a very odd Nigel Neal play with Roger Daltrey, where he had actually quite a reasonable part, but he's there to get thumped and fall over. I love the Ogrons, don't you? I think their costumes are absolutely fantastic. The leather thing that they've got going on, but the colours, those dun colours, and they look really good, and they're really tall and sort of. But I remember being slightly surprised, because on the book cover of Doctor Who and the Space War, the novel of Frontier in Space, the painting is of a sort of location shot of the Ogron where the hair is sort of curled, and I thought for ages the Ogrons had a sort of sideburns that turned into a hairy growth that went into the mouth, so they'd have a sort of almost like chewing their moustache. But actually, that's quite a nice design idea. It wasn't; it was just the angle that the hair was curling at. But yeah, I thought an Ogron had a sort of slightly moustache, but coming out of the side of the mouth and up the sideburns. So I was quite surprised when they didn't, when I finally saw them. But a bit like Chris, who's chosen this, I've only heard his introduction. I will hear his favourite things at the end of the appropriate episode. He's challenged himself with this one, and he's challenging me because he found Pertwee difficult to like. I've always enjoyed Pertwee, but I have to say when I first saw his stories, having imagined them from the Target books, they were always a disappointment, and I actually had to. Although this location stuff's great, it's fantastic. There's a real sense of scale about it. All those extras and you could see far into the distance. That's a nice big shot. But they were never quite how I'd envisaged them, and it was only much later. Actually, when I did my book with Rob Shearman, Running Through Corridors, and I sort of watched with a view to enjoying, and I watched in context, that I learnt to sort of love the Pertwee era as much as I did others. Now it must be something to do with the costumes, but I think the soldiers in this, the unit soldiers, look more soldierly than they sometimes do. And I don't know why that is. I think it must be the costumes. But Benton looks great in that outfit. And there's that brilliant picture of him, isn't there, with the walkie-talkie, which is a great shot of Benton, one of the publicity pictures. And here we are in the future. We don't know yet, but people have shiny faces, and the sets are lit green. And I love this bit. For all the wrong reasons. Now, I think this was filmed at two different times. So the wide shot with the two of them and the back of the controller's head, where he goes, "No complications," was filmed first, and then I think they retook the close-up because they decided the Ogrons had to speak in a different way, and he had a different line as well. So it was changing the content as well, but I guess maybe they did that because they didn't want the Ogrons to speak like "no complications." They wanted them to speak. But it is a bit like yes, and "no complications." But fortunately, they don't have many lines. But the slow drawl, it does work with what they look like. I don't think you'd want them to come in and say, "My lord, I have brought you news from Rome," which is essentially sort of what he's doing, but in future speak. Although that would be quite funny if they were terribly Shakespearean. But there's quite a few Shakespearean monsters in Doctor Who. There are quite a few sort of drony monsters in Doctor Who as well. But I think the speech pattern they went for is better, although the fact that now I'm not supposed to be watching this archly. The things I enjoy cannot be, "Oh, I like it because it's rubbish," because I don't like Doctor Who because it's rubbish. I'm a great, I don't watch Doctor Who with a sort of arch postmodernist eye, and I actually get a bit. Now I'm all for people to sort of enjoy the sort of campy, frothy nonsense that Doctor Who can sometimes be. Although again, Doctor Who was never really camp to me. It was always, I don't think I've got a good camp radar. Although my partner says I can be sometimes camp, and I don't know what she's talking about. No, I enjoyed Doctor Who because it was exciting and it was scary. And when it was funny, it was when it was meant to be funny, when the jokes were good or the actors did a witty thing. And I went through a period, actually, of getting very cross with people that sort of liked Doctor Who because they thought it was rubbish. Partially because that's how the media sort of went, that was the story the media told. So then people at, say, university would say to me, oh yeah, Doctor was good because it was spit enough, wasn't it? I was going, no, you weren't watching it when you were 8 going, ha ha ha, yes, I'm sort of rather archly askance at this. You were thrilled and excited, and a thing that can do that is good quality. Now, obviously, we're watching stuff that's quite old, and so certain naiveties or ways of doing things that are dated or looks that are dated now can cause us amusement. But I'm less switched on to that, I think. Not that there is anything wrong with people enjoying Doctor Who in a different way from me, unless, as I say, they're sort of slagging it off, which does annoy me. So I'm when I think it's cheating of me. I think. I think it's cheating of me if I choose something because it's a bit rubbish. Because no, I'm looking to enjoy this on its own terms. But who knows? Who knows? This is early days for this podcast and this video, and I will probably be dictated to by what you want. Should anybody send me feedback, and I'm not shouting into the void, love that. Although I just saw a boom, but it's kind of worth it for that lovely sort of pan back. There's a real sort of sense of depth with the sets there in Dalekville, which I know is a common thing throughout the story, and I'll probably be talking about again. And I do like the costumes in this. I think it's Mary Husband, isn't it? And I think it's her only one. What do I know about Mary Husband? Not much, apart from whose husband wasn't her husband. I think she was the partner of Jimmy Perry, one of the co-writers of Dad's Army and the Crofton Perry, I'm not telling you which one he was, sitcoms for until he died, I think, at the time of his death. Mary Husband. And in fact, I think I put somebody who was writing something about this in touch with her, but I don't think they had much luck. 'Cause sometimes that happens. I get an email going, do you know where so-and-so is? And I go, well, I don't, but I'll find them. And I did. 'Cause that's how I spend my time sometimes. Unpaid. And there's a lot of people like that in the sort of world of Doctor Who, sort of, sharing knowledge and helping to add to the great sum total of things that we know and people that we track down. I'm often calling upon other people to go, have you ever tracked down so-and-so? I love this. I love in fact, I've done a podcast about this, one of my other podcasts, Indefinable Magic. I've done one about food, and I use this as the sort of the key text in my sort of Doctor Who foodiness. That's a nice shot of the sergeant's feet, and yeah, the way they're shooting the soldiers, they look. I think they look more realistic. And then this is night, isn't it? It's darkness is closing in, which is lovely, and that going into the tunnel and the time effect, that's really good. And we're back with Pertwee, yes, supping his wine. The Doctor is a pretentious wine bore, and yet I don't care, because John Pertwee does that very well, and in a way that to me is not annoying nor pompous, Chris, because because I think he pitches it just right. But what this did to me, I can taste that red wine because of the acting and because of the way that it's written. I can taste that Gorgonzola cheese. And when I was a kid, my mum was very much she grew a lot of our food because we didn't have much money. So, food wasn't just something that she'd worked hard for to buy. It was also something she worked hard for to bring up from the very bowels of the earth. So we had to, we were taught to appreciate food, and we would sort of try new things. And she liked things like blue cheese, so that was on the table. And I remember trying it, thinking it was manky old stuff. I mean, it is. It's basically curdled milk that mold's grown on. But I love blue cheese, and now the oozier a cheese, the better. And I love John Levine's acting of the thwarted famishedness. And I remember the unjust. I don't like the way Richard Franklin drinks the wine, because if that's a good wine, there's no way that would knock you sick if you guzzled it like that. Although actually, it's not as bad as I remember it. I remember him sort of draining the whole lot like it was Ribena. It's actually not as bad as that, so I might give him a pass. The memory has cheated, but the idea that. Yeah, that food, that those complex flavours were something a gourmand like the Doctor, a man of sophisticated intelligence and experience, would sort of savour and enjoy. I got that idea that, so if I didn't like a food, it wasn't because it was nasty or horrible, it's because I hadn't quite sort of assimilated it yet. So I'd go back to it, and now a glass of red wine and a pokey gorgonzola would be right up my street. I don't drink anymore, so sadly... I won't be having any of that red wine, but I can taste that. I can smell it. But that's sadly the only things around here that are sardonic and cynical are me, and age has done that. Not in a barrel. And one of the reasons I've chosen to go with this one, I've had a few friends. I sort of sent out a Mayday going, I'm doing this podcast, choose a story, tell me some things, and a few came in, and Chris was amongst the first batch. Lovely Chris Boyle, check out his stuff. But the reason I thought I'd go with Day of the Daleks, because it's 4 parts, which seems to me, the standard. In fact, when I was growing up, I thought all Doctor Who stories were 4 parts. I was utterly baffled when I discovered, because my earliest memories are sort of Key to Time season 17 in particular. So 4 parts seems to me to be the sort of, the standard model of Doctor Who. Now, you two, Shura, if that could be your great granddad, obviously, and he sort of enjoyed doing that, which is odd because they're goodies. So they make very little effort not to kill anybody. Now this is, and one of the reasons I chose this one as well is that Shura, who we've just seen kill somebody in cold blood, is played by Jimmy Winston, who, as I record this, has just passed away. He was on my to-do list of people to contact. He was a keyboard player with a rock band called the Small Faces, which will mean an awful lot to those of you who know a lot about music. And he would have been a fascinating subject for an interview. But he is on the DVD. And Steve Roster, I know, who interviewed him for the documentary, said he was a great bloke and a fascinating interviewee. Gypsy Kemp, who's this radio operator here, was also known as Sarah Kemp, and acted under that name in Australia, where she became one of the few, and I don't know if there are any others, I'm sure there probably are, but she was a regular actress in Sons and Daughters, the Australian soap that we would get on in the daytime before Neighbours and Home and Away came and dominated the schedules. Sons and Daughters was the Australian import, and Sarah Kemp was a regular in that. And I think Katie Manning knew her. I don't know. I have talked to Katie about this, and I can't remember, because the problem is now when I interview people, got so many eyes on the recorders working and everything being right and blah, 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 and actually doing my job that I don't actually retain the information. So I have talked to Katie Manning about Gypsy/Sarah Kemp. I think they were mates out in Australia. She's no longer with us, sadly. Gypsy Kemp. This is glorious, isn't it? John Pertwee drinking a glass of whiskey whilst doing karate on a guy. That is so Doctor Who. That is so John Pertwee's Doctor Who. I think Pertwee's great. Now I never quite got to the bottom of why the factotums of the future have shiny faces at all and speak like that. It's to suggest that they are Dalek-y, I guess. I love that cut from the control room to the same shot of the controller in the Daleks control console. Although I don't remember that screen being as wobbly as that, and it's really wobbling in the wind. I remember that being sort of, and I've seen this many times, and as an adult, so this isn't a childhood memory being faulty. That's flapping away, isn't it? But nonetheless, it facilitated that great cut. Is an enemy of the Daleks. I mean, you could just bore people to death, Goldie. They're not the greatest Dalek voices, but I'm here to celebrate. So let's jump over that. This is very this fading between Daleks is quite a nice way to herald the end of the episode. The Daleks are back. That is episode 1 of Day of the Daleks. Which I don't know about you, I found plenty to enjoy in. And I haven't even mentioned Aubrey Woods. But I have to choose something that is my favourite thing about that episode. And I think it has to be... it has to be the cheese and wine. It has to be... I think the fact that, because I remembered from the book the RHIP thing, and I wondered if that was something that was in the book, like a lot of things that then didn't make it into the TV version, like Trenchard's safety catch in the Sea Devils, and various other bits that have been really memorable in the books that turned out not to be in the TV episodes. That one is in the TV episode. And I love the look on John Levine's face. I remember thinking it's so unfair. So even though it's just a sort of little bit of comedy in the episode, it's actually very memorably done. And I particularly like what it says about sort of the enjoyment of complex food, and how your palate is something that perhaps needs to assimilate stuff in order to enjoy things that are complex and strange, which, Doctor Who itself is. So it's the cheese and wine party. It's my favourite thing about episode 1. What is my friend Chris Boyle's favourite thing about episode 1?
My favourite part of episode 1 is Aubrey Woods. He's possibly the best thing of the entire story, to be honest. His performance just gets better as the story goes on. He plays the controller, and his stillness, his diction, it's amazing. He completely sells the most ridiculous character in this episode. He looks like an evil Gary Newman, but he plays him with the gravitas of Daniel Day-Lewis. Superb. I'm also going to predict that Toby will mention Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory during this episode.
Well, you predict wrong. I barely mentioned Aubrey Woods at all, and I think subconsciously that's because I'm keeping sort of stuff in the back of my head in reserve in case I run out of things to say. And I love Aubrey Woods, and I know he's going to be an aspect of this that I will talk about a lot, but Chris has been quite canny there, I think, without realising it, because he's now chosen, as he says, he gets better as the story goes on, so I probably had Aubrey Woods up there in reserve to do for later episodes, but now can't, because Chris has chosen him. That's one of the rules. I'm not entirely sure what the rules are, but that's one of them. I can't pick something that's already been picked, or, I don't know, Wales gets set on fire. As I say, the rules are a bit vague at this point in proceedings. So Chris has chosen Aubrey Woods. I've chosen the gorgonzola and the wine, which was so memorable, and I find very enjoyable. And as I say, I like what it says about. I'm a firm believer in not wasting food and in trying new food, and there's nothing that I won't eat, actually, because I've gone back to try things having not liked them, and my life is better for it. So there we go. That's the end of episode 1. So, night is drawing in. Ghosts are around. Let's see if I can get through Day of the Daleks, episode 2, without 3 gorillas storming in and holding me at gunpoint. In the hope that doesn't happen, I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1, go. I can already this early in the podcast / video, I can see a theme developing where I press play and there's either a massive delay. There's not either. There is a massive delay, and that time it's because it didn't actually kick in because the Blu-ray player is behind me because of plugs. It doesn't matter. I love this title sequence. Louis Marks, of course, wrote this. What an odd career he has with Doctor Who. He turns up and does Planet of Giants and has an episode lopped off. Oh yes, and the Dalek lady woman here, she actually fluffs. She says the same time zone, but because it's at the end of the episode, she's she gets the ignominy of fluffing twice. And again, if you're like Gypsy Kemp's character, if you're on the radio and you go, oh, so it's the same time, you can sort of you get away with that because it's people stumble. In fact, people stumble in real life much more than they do in drama. But if you're a staccato alien wax lady, I think that's the one time you can't stumble to add a bit of naturalism to proceedings. And of course, typically, that's when it happens, typically at the end of the episode. The shiny faces thing is interesting because if it was just the sort of waxy space future ladies, you could sort of go, well, they've undergone some sort of Dalekoid conversion, but the controller's quite waxy faced as well. It's like they're cosplaying as Autons. And of course that's weird, isn't it? The playing of the theme sting. Which is not something repeated before or since, which means I sort of like it because I like it when they do different things. Look at the depth of that set, the way that the Dalek set is positioned, obviously in the floor layout, which means that, because that's not going to be a whole set behind them, but because of the angles, it gives you a real sense of scale. And the size of the doors, which are quite small because they're Dalek-sized, but depending on where you stand, they give a different sort of feel. Is really interesting stuff because often Doctor Who uses height to suggest things that are imposing or scary or a sense of scale, whereas here, actually, those small doors, they do give a sense of scale depending on where they're shot, but also there are times when the controller's sort of going through them and they seem very small, and that makes them sort of slightly cramped and disorienting. It's what they do with scale in the set design, particularly in the future. The set design and the direction working in synthesis, I think, is really interesting. And then you throw in the vision mixing where there are fades and there are cuts from a shot of a person to that shot then being in a monitor. I think is some really good quality visuals. Now, here's a thing. Anna Barry playing a Nat. And she's done bits of telly going back quite a long way. But she was the daughter of... She's still the daughter of... Well, he's no longer with us. Michael Barry, who was the head of drama at the BBC in the 50s, responsible for hiring, among many, Rudolph Cartier, who directed the Quatermass serials and who I will frequently ask people about working with in my podcast, as certain people have pointed out. Jonathan Morris. It's like... there's like a drinking game. If you listen to my Who's Round podcast, what was it? You worked with Rudolph Cartier, of course. So Rudolph Cartier, along with the words verisimilitude and beguiling, are ones that, if there was a drinking game for the stuff that I whack out to you, would probably be worth several tumblers full. So I will try and avoid them. But Anna Barry, is the daughter of Michael Barry. She was in a film called, a short film that won an Oscar a couple of years ago, The Silent Child. I watched it because it was about a deaf child, and I have a stepson who is deaf, and Anna Barry turns up as the grandmother in the film, which is lovely, and it won an Oscar. It's a beautiful thing. I think it's called The Silent Child, but and I've only noticed this because I'm watching it on quite a big screen, is that something she's mentioned in Linda Bellingham's autobiography, Anna Barry, as being a friend of Linda Bellingham and as being someone who was in a car accident and I think lost an eye and had because her partner was a plastic surgeon. Had sort of rebuilding, and I could see a little bit of a scar there. So that's and I'd sort of dismissed that, and I wasn't going to mention it, but it is in the public record because it's in Linda Bellingham's book. So I hope it's not prurient of me to mention it. And I only mentioned it because I sort of saw the scar there, only very slight. She's a beautiful, striking woman, and obviously plastic surgery and things were in its infancy then. But there we are. So there's an interesting that I hope is not prurient. Whereas the extra behind the Brigadier's hair, the hair that lady has looks like it's been rebuilt by somebody with a lot of volume. And I think Anna Barry, by the way, is excellent as Anat, and she is exactly as I'd imagined her from the book. I remember seeing pictures of her and going, that's pretty much what I thought she'd look like. And she plays the part very well and very straight. And I started off this episode talking about Louis Marks, who, yes, had an episode of Planet of the Giants chopped after it had been recorded, which I think is never a good sign. And then disappears from Doctor Who for ages, then comes back and does this, writes a story that isn't about the Daleks, because this wasn't a Dalek story. This was a time travellers from the future story, you know, the averting the disaster from the future. I love the lighting in this, and I love the lighting in this cellar scene. And so, yeah, he writes this story that doesn't have the Daleks in. And I think in the scripts, the Ogrons aren't called Ogrons. I think they're called Monster. That's a bit lazy. At least, come on. Yeah, they've got some monsters. And they were supposed to be dog-like, which would have worked, I think. But I think the ape-like, gorilla-like thing, gorilla confusion aside, and they look so good. The costumes, you know, going with the mask look so good. The Doctor being locked in a wine cellar. And then Louis Marks doesn't come back to Doctor Who for ages, and then does two stories in quite close succession, Planet of Evil and Mask of Mandragora in the Tom Baker era. But it's an odd sort of... He works for three different regimes, but isn't a sort of regular for any of them until the end when he does those couple for Tom Baker. And I alluded to before that there's various people who, when Doctor Who stuff is being prepared, sort of give their time to be a sort of network of helpful people. And this was the first time I think I felt I'd been any use, because an old friend of mine, Mark Patterson at university, had said, when, you know, because all my friends at uni knew I was a Doctor Who fan, said, oh, my family know a guy who wrote Doctor Who, Louis Marks. I think Mark knows Louis Marks' daughter. So anyway, when they were preparing this DVD, I think they were struggling to find him. And Mark had befriended me on Facebook. And I like the shooting of this scene. Doctor and Joe are in the cellar, he said, conjuring images for people who are just listening to the podcast. I'll get this right, I promise. And Louis Marks, yes, they tried Louis Marks' agent, and his agent said, oh, I think he's dead. And I hate that when people just go, assume somebody's dead because they did something a long time ago, especially if it's somebody's agent. I think that's what happened, so I don't wish to be bad-mouthing an agent in case that was misreported to me, but they certainly didn't know where he was. And I think there was an assumption that he died. And I hadn't read he died, and I felt that was news to me, so I would investigate. So I actually dropped Mark a line by the wonders of Facebook. And Mark, I haven't seen Mark in 20 years, but he'd always ring up when I remember when Moth St. My Doctor Who scarf went to the West End, he just rang up and said, oh, you're doing a thing, well done. Yeah, lovely man. And he and I said, I sent him a message on Facebook saying, are you still in touch with Louis Marks' family? And actually he was, and they got a message to the daughter, and Louis Marks was poorly, I think, and living in Israel. But what that meant was that the residuals for this, which would have gone to, I think, an agent who didn't know where he was. Actually, ended up he was reconnected with monies that were due him. So I think because of that, I feel it might be the only useful thing I've done in the entire history of my association with Doctor Who is ensure that a writer towards the end of his life got a few residuals that he was due when certain people didn't know where he was. And of course, he was in Israel because Mark, my friend, is Jewish, and the freedom fighters are called Anat, Boaz, and Shura, which I believe Hebrew inspired or Hebrew names. And of course, that part of the world has, freedom fighting going on and sort of guerrilla warfare and various other bits and bobs. So, he was obviously, trying to evoke some of the feel of that, if not take on the politics of it. Yeah, so that's Jimmy Winston Ashura, who's just died recently, which is a shame because I would have. As I say, he was on my list, and Steve Broster said he was such a lovely guy. And Mark Ayres knew him as well. I think Mark Ayres, the Doctor Who composer, went to buy some sound equipment off this guy, and it turns out it was because he did sell sound equipment later in life. That was his job. And it's Jim Winston who went, oh yeah, I was in Doctor Who. But Shura in the book is, I think, a younger, sort of naive type of figure, a sort of young blonde guy, to give a slightly different dynamic to the three of them. But he leaps about, he's game, and I love this because I think this is where he gets got by an Ogron, isn't it? And he's got is he sort of Z free to Eagle? He's slightly Cockney. But this stuff on location looks great. Yeah, and there's a sort of tough sort of bit of spittle going on in that performance, but that's great. The way the Ogrons tower and that costume, they're great. They're great. I love the Ogrons. They're a superb addition to the Doctor Who universe. That's a nice shot through a bit of the set. Doctor Who directors are because it's science fiction. Well, no, I think because television at that time, because you were shooting, multi-camera, which you only really shoot a soap with now, and a soap would probably bulk at that sort of shooting. But with something like Doctor Who, you need it. And what I like about Doctor Who of this period is that a director will dictate the visual style and indeed the pacing and everything, and the music, the sound of it. The director, we as Doctor Who fans, can identify a Douglas Camfield story because it's probably shot a bit closer in and with, beads of sweat on people's foreheads and slightly sort of chilling, ethereal music and certainly, an aptitude for toughness and action and convincingness in the rough and tumble. Whereas other directors bring different things. Paul Bernard, is clearly very visually very ambitious. Now I very much, again, this was another bit I'd remembered from the book where, of course, the soldiers ring. So instead of giving themselves away, the guerrillas go, oh, okay, we need to get the prisoners up. But the Doctor can't give anything away because somebody's holding a gun to him and Joe is under threat. So he does this thing, which is don't forget to tell the Marines. Now, as a kid, I didn't know what that meant. I'm still not entirely sure. Tell it to the Marines. It's something like, isn't it? It's an idiom. It's a phrase that means tell it to the Marines because the soldiers won't believe you. I think if somebody said things like, the moon is made of cheese, yeah, tell it to the Marines because the soldiers won't believe you. It's something like that. So, but what I loved, without knowing the details of it, was that the Doctor had a thing that he could say that would mean there was a tacit understanding between him and the Brigadier, which would tip the Brigadier off, which is exciting because all right, he's held prisoner, but the good guys are coming, and the bad guys, they're not the bad guys, but the other lot don't know. I really liked the sort of the cleverness and the tricksiness of that without knowing all the exact details of it. And I remember this bit where Joe gets pitched forward to the future, and assuming that was an episode ending, because it's a big, it's a big development, and of course the mystery of the gorilla disappearing early on. But actually it's not. It's just another, this bit of progression for the story. Now that's bold because there's a fade there, a crossfade as the controller spins his chair around, and it's not entirely flush, but it works. And you're used to everybody having to freeze for locked off shots, but they go, no, we're going to have the controller spinning around, and we're going to make that work. She'll be better off dead. Yeah. Oh dear, because she's in the future where everyone has a shiny face. And here we are. I can't choose him as my favourite thing, Aubrey Woods, and I haven't mentioned Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, although he's the Candyman. The Candyman can. And I knew he was a musical performer because I remembered, I think Jason Donovan was on Wogan. And then they had a few of the cast of Jason is Technicolor Dreamcoat, I think, that Jason Donovan was doing at the West End, and Aubrey Woods was one of them. And that tipped me off that, okay, he's an actor, but he's also a man of musical theatre. And I think Barry Letts is quite hard on him on the commentary for this on the DVD, which is unusual for Barry Letts because he's a very generous man, very generously minded. But I think he felt that this performance was slightly out of kilter with everything else. But I think that's why it works. I think it needs to be. And I think if you've got a waxy face, you've got to differentiate yourself from the sort of down and earthy, sort of the gorillas who are the other guys who are a bit more sort of naturalistic and hurling themselves about. This sort of theatrical body language. I mean, he's got silver nails, for goodness sake. He can't exactly lounge about chewing the cud. So I do like Aubrey Woods very much. I think he's got great presence. And I also think he's very good at suggesting that the controller kind of believes what he's saying. And I think that the journey that he goes on is really interesting. He's also, of course, Crantor in the Blake 7 episode Gambit, which if Barry Letts thinks he's a bit camp in this. But again, it's a great episode of Blake 7, that where everyone is dialed up to 11 on the campometer, including John Leeson and Bill Filer and and Professor Chronotis and Amelia Ducat. It's a veritable feast of Doctor Who types having a whale of a time. He's very precise in his movements, isn't he? Have I missed the bit? Was I chatting where he said, "Now you've told me the year," which is very good because I'm not getting into the unit dating thing. Is there a? I think there's a documentary on this called The Unit Dating Theory, which I ended up narrating because I was around and cheap. This is great because it cuts, doesn't it, it comes in and then it comes out and he's on the monitor screen. Love that. That's glorious. That's really fun. Although, again, it was wobbly in the last episode. I didn't notice it was on strings. Sometimes clearing up the picture can spoil things. I first watched this on a sort of grotty bootleg. It will have looked $1 million, albeit $1 million like it was underwater and 100 years old. And the sort of framing of the Daleks is nice there. I've just put my hand in my cup of tea, fact fans. The lighting in this cellar set is very nice. I'm presuming there's not much of it, but it's suitably atmospheric. And where better? If I was John Pertwee, I'd just free myself and just stay there for a bit and go, well, it's a lovely couple of little numbers here. Oh, there's a cheeky Rioja and a very avant-garde Merlot and a Malbec that's a right obtuse git. They look terrific, don't they? The Ogron was always played by Rick Lester. I remember in any picture from Day of the Daleks in Doctor Who magazine, it was always an Ogron, Rick Lester. You thought, and I'm sure when I saw the end credits, I was like, "There's millions of Ogrons credited, but it's always Rick Lester. Perhaps it was in his contract." There's a bit of a delay when, yes, I love Scott Fredericks, but his throwing himself on the floor after being hit by the door acting was like it was on a slightly delayed. They showed this bit on the news when John Pertwee died, and I was furious because the Nick Hyam, the BBC arts correspondent, you'd think would have liked the arts and television, and although television isn't counted at the arts, which is why people patronise it. But if it's so easy to make television that millions of people watch and that lasts for generations, you try it. I will come back to Nick Hyam because this is quite important. In the special edition, Greedo shoots first, I think, does he? I think it's such a shame. The Doctor, for me, is not somebody that disintegrates. Even lumbering, slow-witted, ape-like factotums of evil machine creatures, because he could have got out of that without killing the thing. And seeing as this is the era where the Doctor does lots of lectures to people about, peace and goodness and all of that sort of thing, and the Doctor generally doesn't take life. I know he often has his cake and eats it, and I know this is a fault with my own liberalism, and I go, no, it's very important that the Doctor doesn't kill things, but he does have unit to blow things up if things do need blowing up. He does have unit to machine gun. I don't mind the Brigadier machine gunning the second Ogron because it stops the Doctor doing it, and actually that's, and I'm aware that Doctor Who isn't necessarily the liberal show I see it as, because I know people who see it as the complete opposite of the Doctor being somebody who identifies what is evil and fights against it. And I'm aware my liberalism is paradoxical and flawed and sometimes contradictory, but I have to see it. I think we create the things we love in our own image, and for me, as somebody that is, I'm not a violent person. I'm a bit of an old liberal, but I also have to acknowledge, and I think genuine liberals do, which a lot of liberals today don't, is acknowledge that there are fundamental flaws or contradictions in our worldview, and I have to accept that I don't like it when the Doctor kills people, although in Doctor Who Adventures, the bad guys get killed all the time, even if it's once removed from the direct actions of the Doctor. But to see him just blatantly disintegrate something, I find very uncomfortable and doesn't fit in with my worldview of Doctor Who, which means that bit probably won't be among the things that I choose of my favourite things. I ran out of time to talk about Nick Hyam, the BBC arts correspondent, and John Pertwee's death on the news. So I will open with that thought. I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. I'm going to open with that thought at the beginning of episode 3, because now what I have to do is I have to see if I have chosen a favourite thing that is the favourite thing that Chris has chosen, and I'm going to choose the Don't Tell It to the Marines, just because I thought it was the Doctor being clever. I thought it was a way that the audience were ahead of the the baleful force, the again, they're not bad guys, but the people holding the Doctor prisoner, keeps him one step ahead of those other guys, which makes us as the audience complicit, and that's quite exciting. But also it's quite educational because it's obviously a thing, but it also works without you knowing what that thing is. And I'm sure I probably would have asked my mum or something like that. So, and if that adds to the sum total of knowledge about the way we express ourselves or idiomatic language or metaphors or whatever, I think that is all good. So, tell it to the Marines, Chris Boyle, because the soldiers won't have chosen the same things as what you have, or something.
My favourite part of episode 2 is a scene. The Doctor and Joe are dragged into the cellar by the keyboard player from the Small Faces and his mates, and the light goes off. And when the light is switched back on again, the framing of the shot is beautiful, and the sound design as the lines, "What do we do now? Tie them up," echo in the darkness, is excellently subtle. Superb little scene.
Oh, well, that's it, yeah. I think I talked all the way through that. Sorry about that. That's going to happen. Sometimes the best bits I'm going to have chatted all the way through, but because this is an audio podcast, if I don't say anything, you don't hear anything apart from, the episode on in the background. So Chris and I did not choose the same thing, but I like his choice, even though I didn't fully assimilate it myself. Anyway, that is the end of episode 2 of Day of the Daleks. As I say, I'm tantalising you with, I'm probably going to have a rant about the way that John Pertwee's death was reported on the BBC News. But for now, that will involve a little bit of time travel. So as we can't be doing that, I'm just going to say cheerio. I was trying to do a clever tie-in with the time travel theme of the story, and I managed not to, so I've just spouted a little bit of nonsense. Hey, at least it proves it's live. Some sort of clever segue and some apt bon mot on which to end proceedings. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Well, welcome. It's episode 3 of Day of the Daleks. I left you on a cliffhanger last time, but when I do the reprise from the cliffhanger, there's not going to be a musical sting. But there is, however, hopefully now, the opportunity for you to press play, which you will do on Day of the Daleks, episode 3, in 3, 2, 1, now. So, the eagle-eared amongst you will notice that I got carried away talking about all sorts of things, because the clip of the Doctor and the Ogron towards the end of episode 2 was the one that they used on the BBC News to report John Pertwee's death. The BBC Arts correspondent Nick Hyam said something along the lines of, the sets may have wobbled and the acting may not have been up to much, but for many children, John Pertwee was Doctor Who. You think, that is such a snide attitude to take. I've never understood people who work in sort of arts journalism who speak about television as though it's something that they've just trodden in. If you don't like it, don't take the shilling writing about it. There are so many brilliant people, and there's so many, especially today, in sort of fandom and on social media. I was looking at something written by John Williams, he's a friend of mine, but I came into contact with him because of Tachyon TV, which is the podcast he did. But he's a brilliantly knowledgeable fellow about television, and he's a really good writer, and he's probably a better writer and knows more about TV than half of the people, most of the people out there who write about television. And I find it really odd that the sort of television critic's job is often given to somebody that used to do the motoring column, or, and so you can get the job of being, a broadsheet newspaper television critic without having seen I, Claudius or Edge of Darkness. You wouldn't become the food columnist if you didn't know what an aubergine was. So anyway, Nick Hyam said that about Doctor Who and John Pertwee, and it was during the wilderness years when it was lazy and shorthand to sort of go, yeah, Doctor Who is a bit naff. But to do that when you're sort of paying tribute to a much loved artist who has just died, who entertained generations of children in a program that has made a huge impact and created cultural iconography, I think deserves a bit of a kick up the backside myself. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. Hopefully that wouldn't happen now, because Doctor Who is a bit more fashionable. Scott Fredericks I haven't mentioned yet. The beautiful Scott Fredericks, who returns to Doctor Who in Image of the Fendal. He's got a great face for this sort of part, but also he's in Blake 7. He's a character called Carnell. I'm not a massive Blake 7 fan. Well, I like it, but I don't know much about it except I know some of the people who are guest stars, and I can name all of the actors. Okay, Blake 7. He's a character in an episode called Weapon, I think. Is it the one with John Bennett? That he's this sort of logic chess champion guy who predicts. He predicts what people will do, and Servalan hires him, and he rather charmingly he realizes that she's going to kill him at the end, so he preempts that, and he scoots off, and I think she's quite turned on by that, and he's kind of, there is a bit of an undercurrent to them, and that's a great sort of one episode character, and he's very good in Image of the Fendal as Max Style, the inscrutable German bad guy. So yes, and they have escaped. Yeah, that's how we talk now. I wonder if there was a take with it. They have escaped, my lord. By Jingo. Oh yeah, and this is where the Doctor gets a look at the dystopia future. There's a lot of Ogrons, aren't there? You forget, because I always think there's only Rick Lester. They are quite. There's quite a number of them, and this location stuff in the desolate Earth future. But Scott Fredericks I did meet briefly at when they showed the special edition of this, at somewhere in the south. No, not the South Bank. Somewhere, it doesn't matter. You can't go there now. It was in the past. And I had a brief chat with him, and he knew who Rob Shearman was, which was rather fun. And he'd been a bit poorly, so he wasn't quite as sort of robust and he wasn't as young as I imagined. And he died a couple of years ago. And I meant to ask him for his autograph, and I didn't because I just didn't. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. I was lucky to meet him, but my fan little completion niggle goes, you had the opportunity to get the autograph of an actor you liked, and you didn't. I didn't. Reader, I didn't. See, this is that the sense of scale and perspective is different here. Suddenly, Aubrey Wood seems sort of cramped and subservient, even because he's having to stoop slightly, even though the Daleks are shorter than him, but they're sort of like malevolent little mites flanking him, It's good. Yeah, what it does with scale, this story. And the vision mixing is interesting, and I know that Steve Bruster was keen to get Mike Catherwood, the vision mixer, on the extras, and I think he's on the commentary, and I think they do a little documentary, don't they, as well, because it's a story where the vision mixing is quite important. And I like the fact that the DVD does that, that you can examine different areas of Doctor Who production, especially if there's a story where it's particularly appropriate to talk about those things. Oh yes, I've forgotten those little bits on the screen filming the Doctor, and I think this of course, talking of the DVD, this is where I make the erstwhile mistake. I nipped over to Birmingham to do something, and I did these voiceovers for Steve, and there's a line that refers to your erstwhile producer, which we'd used in the sense of how Doctor Who fans have used it, which is to mean sort of dogged and doughty, and it doesn't mean that at all. It's got the word while in it. It means former, but because we as Doctor Who fans, I think the theory is, I hadn't come up with this, Gary Gillett did, I think, is that we think erstwhile means doughty and loyal because there was a picture of Sergeant Benton that referred to him as the erstwhile Sergeant Benton, but that meant that he used to be Sergeant Benton, but since Robot was Warrant Officer Benton, so he was a former sergeant, an erstwhile. Again, it's got the word "while" in it, which doughty and dogged does not. And anyway, so we have used erstwhile to mean that, loyal, whatever, doughty, dogged. And I thought it was a very Doctor Who thing, and it was a mistake, and it's in the script, and I read it out. I was tired, and I was rushing from one thing to another, but neither of those things are enough mitigation. I have to say I was party to a mistake, and as somebody with an English degree, it's quite an embarrassing one, but I have to own it, even though I didn't write the script, so I'm sort of owning it whilst going, but I didn't write the script, but I did say it out loud. But I've since had erstwhile used to me in that context, in the environs of the BBC, used in a script by somebody that has never seen Doctor Who. So isn't that funny that mistake has replicated itself or rippled out? Can't all have rippled out from Doctor Who magazine, can it? And somehow entered the life of that person in the BBC who was who used in a script, said it's your erstwhile agent here, but it was meaning your hard-working agent. And in fact, I went, I think that's a very creepy look the shiny space lady gives, who is played by Deborah Brayshaw, who for years was an actress that I didn't know where she was and couldn't find, but I did a podcast interview with somebody recently. He said, oh, that's my friend's mum. So I sent out a sort of a plea going, oh, tell her to get in touch. I'd love to interview her, but it's the call into the wild. I don't know if it was passed on, but she hasn't bitten. I'm always on the lookout to catch an actor we haven't spoken to before. One of the rare examples of smoking in Doctor Who, which as a kid I thought was terribly grown up. I loved it when people had a fag in Doctor Who because it enabled me to tell my friends who thought Doctor Who was a children's programme, no, they have smoking and everything. It's all grown up. And I do quite like it as a touch. It's like the rare occasions there's blood and smoking. That's what grown-ups do. And Valentine Palmer here playing Monia. Now, in the book, he's Moni. In this, he's Monia. In the closing credits of the BBC Video Omnibus edition, he becomes, because I guess Valentine is not a name, perhaps the credits person associated with maleness, maybe. He's credited as Monica. That guard that we briefly saw there was an actor who did a lot, George Raystrick. It's his only Doctor Who. He had a great career as a character actor, worked for the RSC, played sort of the clownish parts in various Shakespeare's for the RSC, and died, if not on stage, backstage. He was working in a play with Bernard Cribbins, and I remember being very cross because he was in an episode of a thing called The Vet that month, but after his death had been announced, and he was a sort of guest lead. He did quite a lot in it, and there wasn't a little, because they used to do that all the time. If somebody had died before their episode of something was shown, they'd go, and since that programme was made, we regret to say that the actor George Raystrick has died. And they didn't do that, and I was really cross, and they certainly wouldn't do that today for somebody who's not a household name. But they used to do it all the time. Remember, they did it for Noel Dyson on A Heartbeat. They did it for Harold Innocent on the Paradise of Death. Remember them doing it for Dino Shafiq on, I think, a repeat of It Ain't Half Hot Mum. And I used to like it when that happened. It gave you a sort of connection, and it made you feel that, you know, the people making things were sort of special, because they come into your homes. And I think an acknowledgement of that is nice, which probably explains why my Facebook feed is just full of going, I have comedian friends who I know have said to other comedians, what, most comedians put jokes up on their Facebook and Twitter? Toby just seems to go, that actor from that thing has died. And I do behave like I'm in some sort of morbid dressing room. Sort of grease paint obituaries. He's brilliant, Aubrey Woods. I really like him. But yeah, George Raystrick, was in a show with Bernard Cribbins, I recall. He's really roughed up actually in this Doctor. It's quite we're pre Holmes and Hinchcliffe where things are really sadistic. But actually, this has elements of this. Particularly Andrew Carr here is. I don't think he gets a name, is he? He's Chief Guard or something. I'm sure he gets a name in the book, and he's not just some random guard. He's the guy that takes over, isn't he? From the control. No, he's the guy that takes over from the controller in this. But the guy that takes over from the controller in the book has a name. I can't remember. But anyway, he's Chief Guard, but he's making the most of it. He's doing some good acting with his whip there, and Pertwee looks really pissed off. It's for this point in the show's history, this is quite sort of nails, and Pertwee's well up for it. He's not having it with this sadist, and Andrew Carr does a nice job. I heard quite a sad story about him that I probably can't say because it's not in the public domain. But and this is Peter Hill, and I seem to recall, and George Raystrick all died within I say a short time of each other. It was probably 5 years or so. Early 90s, I think these two died. I think George Raystrick must have been around that time as well. So it seemed to me that every episode 3 of Day of the Daleks was sort of gradually losing people. We'll be outside if you need us. He's more than just a guard. He's investing it with a lot of character. Yeah, Peter Hill, I think, had been a regular in Crossroads, hadn't he? And I think had been. I'm sure I read somewhere he'd asked to be killed off so that he wouldn't be tempted to go back because, the security of a regular part in something is very tempting for an actor. So if you stop yourself from having access to something, it forces you to seek other opportunities and perhaps have more variety. I think that would be suicide now because there's so little being made. But in those days, you took your chances and you went, well, I'd get an episode of this drama that week and that sitcom the next week, then a bit of theatre, but so much less is being made now. I think he died on Christmas Day. Peter Hill, did he? That's. I think he did. I'm not swearing to that, but that's something that's lurking in the back of my head. But yeah, I remember reading about it in the Stage or in Doctor Who magazine. But yes, it seemed to be that the Day of the Daleks went through a phase of I love that little moment between them, where the manager just goes, "Don't trust him," and the Doctor clocks it again. That a bit like the "Don't tell it to the Marine" things, where you're slightly just ahead and you feel complicit in proceedings from the goodies' point of view, which always gives you a bit of hope. But this is nice because he's only in this episode, the manager, isn't he? But he gets a total story. He comes in, he has the bit with the Doctor, but then he has that clash with the guard, and then he has this bit with the. And now, of course, he's got this bit with the controller, but we know that he's a good guy. But we also know that he's a good guy in a very tenuous position. And your family, and that speaks volumes. And you really feel for him, and the camera's trusting the actors by going really close in on both of them, and they both totally deliver the sort of inscrutable, polite threat from Aubrey Woods, who we also sort of know is a good guy. Really, he's doing what he's told. Peter, that sort of trying to hold it together but shaking that Peter Hill's doing there is great. It's lovely, and he waits until the controller's gone, and I don't know why his secret radio to the rebels just happens to be in the Doctor's cell, but I'll take it because I'll take it because we need that bit of information. And but the poor old manager. I mean, he's about to get got, isn't he? And that's it. I mean, what does he get? 4 or 5 minutes of screen time? But he's a totally rounded character in terms of what he contributes to the story. He's more than just imparting a bit of information. He gets a little, you'd call it an arc nowadays, but he gets a progression and a journey, and it's rather sad. I've missed the bit, haven't I, where he said, "Now I've told you the year." I was looking for it last episode, but I think a little bit too late. I do like Joe's costume in this, and Pertwee can carry it off, can't he? He's so. I do understand Chris's point about the fact that sometimes when the Doctor thinks he's being clever, he's actually being a bit of an arse. But you know how sometimes you let rogues get away with things that somebody like me wouldn't get away with, because a charming rogue, you sort of go, "No, I'll take that from you because you're a charming rogue." I know I'm not a charming rogue. I think it's the same with Pertwee. Sometimes where you go, "Oh, you're a pretentious git," because it's Pertwee, because of how he looks, because of how he holds himself, and they like being happy and prosperous. That's great. That's killer stuff from the Doctor. You sort of take it. I think he inhabits the role of the Doctor so well, and does things that if they were said by other people you wouldn't like them, and yet somehow he gets away with it. He wears things that I would love to be able to wear what Jon Pertwee wears and not look like a tool. But I would look like a tool. I'm not elegant like him. He holds himself very well. But I would look like an absolute Burke in that. He looks great. And what an interesting piece of casting he was, because he was the radio comic, the funny voice man, and he rises to the occasion with this dramatic stuff, like with that guard. And this bit here, he's not accepting it from the controller at all. But the controller's trying to maintain this sort of veneer of civility, and the Doctor's not having it. Good for you, Doctor. And Joe's been completely taken in. Poor old Joe. Yep, Superius, they have a quisling. They use the word quisling in this, don't they? Which was a really good word to learn early. I remember I was quite young when I learned it. Did I learn it from this? I don't know if I did. I think I learned it at junior school, but it was a Q word, and words beginning with Q were few and far between. Oh, of course, this is 5 years since Evil of the Daleks. Which was the last time. Oh, and they'd done a trailer for this, hadn't they? Which I think is lost. And in fact, I know it's lost because I've not seen it. It's not on the DVD. Of the Daleks on London Landmarks. And I think, was that Robert Jewell, the original, one of the original Dalek operators? I think that was his last Doctor Who booking. Now I remember this in the book, because she hits him on the top of the head. And he goes, I think we had an urban myth in our household that the Ogrons were only vulnerable at the top of their head, rather than actually if you hit somebody near where their brain is, it's going to knock them out. But I think it was a bit like that was like the Sontarans' probic vent. The Ogrons were susceptible only if you hit them on the top of the head. I don't know if that was because that was how it was explained in the book, or just the picture showed it like that. I don't know. I can't remember. But like the mouth moustache, it was a thing that was my assumed knowledge and history of the Ogrons that actually just wasn't true. This is the slowest. Now they are okay. The leap, the Ogron who leapt, that was brilliant. But they really aren't. They really aren't in a hurry to chase the slightly speeded up, I think, tricycle. But that's funky. You get a new piece of equipment, and John Pertwee goes, "Oh, I'd like a go on that." And that's quite a nifty. That's quite a nifty sequence. I'd remembered that being worse than that. I'd remembered the Ogrons moving far slower, and that's a brilliant shot. I love that. The Ogrons in vast numbers on location look terrific. All right, Monica. Monica is given the incorrect moniker in the closing titles. Valentine Palmer has written a book about the Titanic because his great uncle was Lightoller, who's the Kenneth More guy in Night to Remember, who was the highest officer to survive. And I think it's a bit conspiracy theory. And I've interviewed Valentine Palmer, but we didn't talk about that. And he sought me out for my Who's Round podcast. Bless him. I love this that the you think, oh, they're just using the titles as a bit of background, which is nifty. That's a nice, in the same way that the signal howl round of the Hartnell titles is sometimes used on Dalek monitors, so that's quite nice. But actually, I think that's the only time in the classic era, well, certainly in the colour era of these sorts of single caption closing credits, where an actor's name appears over the action, because normally it cuts to the title sequence and the names. It doesn't sort of fade over. Senior guard, not chief guard, Andrew Carr. So yeah, actually, the Doctor's name appearing on the screen like that is rare, and it does that because it's fading into, because it's doing that thing like it does with the faces of the titles, join in with the thing on the monitor. But there's a precedent for that because Dalek monitors have used Doctor Who title sequences before. It's like their spare time they watch Doctor Who to wind themselves up and have nicked the graphic design to wind themselves up even more as their screensaver. Let's use the title sequence as our screensaver. Oh, but these Daleks don't talk. Let's use the title. So yeah, okay, okay. So, that's interesting because I would have said the trike chase was sort of in the middle of the episode. It comes really close to the end, doesn't it? And I know the end of episode 4 will come as a bit of a surprise as well. So it feels to me like this is a dense story that's rather packed. The end comes as a surprise every time, or maybe it's just because I'm chuntering on. Anyway, what's my favourite thing about that episode? I think it can't be the fact that... Is it the fact that John Pertwee's name appears at the end and that the titles blend with the picture? Yeah, I'm never going to get a chance to do that again because that's the only time that happens. I know the credits appear in the 60s. The credits appear over the picture and go up, but I think that's slightly different. But the title sequence, because there's no title sequence in the closing of the 60s episodes. I like that, and it sort of ties in with the whole visual inventiveness and the using monitors to blend from one scene to another. And this is like the ultimate iteration of that, is that the monitor actually blends into the closing title sequence. So yeah, I think that's a legitimate. It's not just that moment. It's that sort of visual motif that keeps reoccurring and culminates in leading us into the closing titles for episode 3. I bet Chris hasn't chosen that. He might have done, but let's see. Chris has chosen for episode 3.
For episode 3, I was a little bit spoiled for choice, I think. There were a number of things that I could have chosen as my favourite over this episode. But I've gone with the motorised tricycle chase. It's possibly the shortest chase sequence in history, but it's absolutely amazing. Pertwee covers about 3 square feet of ground when he's being chased on this tricycle, and then he's eventually captured, and the Daleks reveal that he really is the Doctor. There's some stills of Troughton and Hartnell get projected on a screen behind him.
Yeah. I thought the tricycle chase was better than I'd remembered. I'd remembered it being awful, and it's not. But apart from the couple of bits you can see where the Ogrons sort of saunter very slowly. Come back, my liege. But I'm happy with my choice as well. Okay, that was the end of episode 3. I wonder if there's a way that I can make the title sequence blend in with the... I'm editing this on iMovie, I've got no idea. It might make a right pig's ear of it. But just imagine that I'm blending the title sequence in with the pictures, and on the podcast, just by... But I will speak to you for Day of the Daleks, episode 4. Thanks for joining me for episode 3. Ta-ta.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
Right, yeah, I'd had a bit of confusion about Robert Jewell, one of the original Dalek operators, who I'm sure had something to do, even though his last credit on Doctor Who is episode 10 of the War Games. And I was right. It wasn't the trailer. There was a trailer for Day of the Daleks. So he may have, but I don't think he was involved with that. That was filmed at lots of London landmarks. I don't know who the Daleks were for that. But Robert Jewell was booked for a day at Ealing with John Pertwee for some sort of trail that never actually happened, but it was part of the production of Day of the Daleks. So that was Robert Jewell, original Dalek operator's last involvement with Doctor Who. So that little thing hanging in the back of my mind was sort of correct. But of course, I like to put some sort of clarification so that my Twitter stream isn't filled with I think you'll finders. I think I might do I think you'll find as a badge. Why not? And just to clear up, Andrew Carr and Peter Hill died within a couple of years of each other. Andrew Carr died in 1992, Peter Hill in 1995. Peter Hill did not die on Christmas Day. He died on the 29th of December. So I was close. And anyway, I'm happy to clear that up because I don't want to think I'll find I get corrected. So there we are. And let's go back to the day of the Daleks, episode 4. Press play in 3, 2, 1, now. Welcome back. It's the final episode of Day of the Daleks. Those of you who are watching these episodes in chronological order, which is how I advise that you do, I mentioned my friend Mark Patterson, I think, in episode 2, helping with the tracing of Louis Marks, who wrote this story. Then didn't hear from Mark, apart from obviously we're Facebook friends, so you sort of think, oh, I know that person. When did you last speak to them? A million years ago. Mark dropped me a line. That's a great opening with the blur coming into focus. That's a glorious way to open the episode. No, I don't. Do they have the zoo? No, they don't, because if they'd had the whole of the bit of the last episode, we'd have seen the beginning of the title sequence. So actually, the cliffhanger sting coming in, which is unusual, is actually only in 2 reprises. What? Yeah, so it's only a 2-episode thing. And as I said, I do like an unusual way of doing the titles. That's why I love season 7 and the ones on the ambassadors of death. I always like it if they mess about a bit with how the titles and cliffhangers and things like that are done. I don't mind sort of messing with the format in that way. That's why the 60s is sometimes interesting, and season 7. Anyway, Mark, my friend, I heard from relatively recently, because he'd got, and it was a video message from his sons. I mean, Mark and I were mates at university, so the fact that he's got sons who are capable of walking and talking and doing things, and they sent me some questions about Doctor Who because they are Doctor Who fans. And I said my friend was called Mark Patterson. And you may, if you're watching the video version of this, see the name Dylan Patterson in the credits, because Dylan, Mark's son, having spoken to me, then sought out my show, Moths Ate My Doctor Who Scarf, and had a listen, and was so inspired that he did a little design for me with my name on it. And I said, well, actually, can we change that and use it for the different iterations of these podcasts and videocasts? So the graphic design, the titles, the title card is done thanks to a young man who was inspired by Doctor Who, whose dad put him in touch with me because he had some questions. And so he then, used what he does well, which is his artistic skill to express himself, as I did through comedy. He's done through art. So I thought that was a very appropriate thing to do, was to use his graphic design. So hire him. He's very young. But what a lovely thing, eh? I love the controller's journey. And Aubrey Woods does it well, because he's the bad guy, but even though he's done some terrible things, threatening the manager and sort of tricking Joe, you still buy the fact that even though he's quite a theatrical baddie, he actually, there's a humanity there, and you think he's doing the right thing. A Quisling, Pertwee, and the controller's position is understandable as far as he is concerned. He is right. Although, of course, he convinces himself that he's right, but he's the one who gets fruit and a nice chair and the nice clothes and the whatever it is that makes your face shiny that other people don't get. So, there's interesting dynamics there. That he is decent. We do like him. We're supposed to sympathise with the journey that he takes. But he took that journey after living a life of largesse and threatening people below him, and doubtless ordering the deaths and imprisonment of people. But he's going, yeah, but I've got to survive. And take my yoga lessons so I can sit like a controller. And I used this story. I remember my uncle is my uncle's the uncle from London, and he's the sort of, he was once in a lift with Tom Baker. It was like, wow, that's amazing. And my uncle has always been a bit disparaging of Doctor Who until it came back. But he's a real film buff, my uncle. And he's edited stuff as well. He's an editor. He's a film editor. But we're not a showbiz family. He's my cool uncle. We're from the countryside. We have muddy boots and drafts and no conduit to show business. But my uncle, who's a bit of a maverick, film editor, but you thought he'd love Doctor Who, but no, he think it's rubbish. And I remember him saying, "Oh, good science fiction, you should like The Terminator. That's a great film." And I remember going, yeah, but The Terminator stole an idea from Doctor Who. So if you like The Terminator, you've got to like Doctor Who. Oh, this is... so Scott Fredericks obviously doesn't die on film very clearly, because you see him jump there and get blown up. And these extras get killed as well. I think they've got names in the book. Are they Mark, Jacob and Zando? I haven't read that book for 35 years. They're somewhere in the back of my head there. And there's Boaz dead, and what looks like lots of sort of bloody bandages. So he gets quite a horrible death. But obviously they got the film back and went, it's really not clear that that's Boaz and Scott Fredericks. So then you have a sudden cut to him halfway through that film sequence on videotape of him against a black drape going, "Look out, Anat!" So that you know that the person that gets blown up is him. And there's a bit like that in a Blake 7 episode. Is it the second episode of Blake 7 with Brian Blessed? I think Pamela Salem also gets killed in a sudden, awkward videotape cutaway in an otherwise filmic sequence because it had not been done clear enough. And I think I think Tony Cornter gets a very unclear death in Colony in Space, because his death is on film, and if they didn't get the requisite close up or whatever. But so they went to make that scene clearer, and I think in a special edition they filmize that shot so it fits in slightly better, because film and videotape do jar. If you're made like us, my mother wouldn't have noticed the difference. She could never tell the difference between film and videotape. If you said, "Look, this is a different sort of grain to the stuff that's inside," she'd go, "I haven't got a clue what you're talking about." But she doesn't get why Alan Partridge is funny, because she finds it too awkward. we Doctor Who fans or old telly fans, I think sometimes we speak a visual language that others do not. And sometimes, we see things as convincing where everybody else thinks things look awful. So, sometimes it works to our advantage and sometimes not. And that meant I talked a lot through the scene with the controller where they say, they would always have found somebody else, which is very true. And that doesn't let the controller off the hook, but it shows the controller being shown mercy, and but it also says to him, you're not special, mate. And anybody would have, there was always going to be somebody that would sell people out. May as well have been you. So it doesn't let him off the hook, but it does make him ultimately do the right thing. And I think that's really interesting, and that's a nice journey. I'm sure it's Mark, Jacob, and Xando, because in the book, characters get more to do. In fact, Monia, he gets the opening of the book. But yeah, and it's quite good that to give extras, as they are in here, they're just, they were in that sequence, who just get killed. But if you suddenly introduce characters and they've got names, you go, I'll get to the, oh no, Mark, Jacob, and Xando have just become, do they all get killed? I think they do. But yeah, they're, when you've got a book, if you can give, if you could give even just a name to a character that is otherwise just sort of, visual fodder. He's got a chain around his neck. He's got a medallion around his neck as, well, you can't see if it's a medallion, but he's got a chain as Monia, Valentine Palmer, who was I think something of a big deal as an actor in the 70s, but he told me he got bored quite easily, so he did a bit of acting and he did quite well, and then he's very beautiful, isn't he? And then went and did something else. He's got a good face. But I had a nice time with him when after he offered his services to be interviewed. He's directed a film as well. Now Sure has had an episode off, hasn't he? Jimmy Winston, and he's going to go and do that great Doctor Who thing of sacrificing yourself. So he's essentially done what, well, they've all essentially done what the Michael Biehn character does in The Terminator. But I think there's an Outer Limits episode as well, isn't there? So it's not an unusual science fiction trope, but it was enough for me to claim that Doctor Who was just as good as the films my uncle liked. Because what my uncle liked about the films was that they were films, and they are filmic. And films can do things that you can't do in a television studio. But I wasn't having that as a furious youngster who wanted everybody to like Doctor Who and was angry if people didn't like Doctor Who. But I think now we've passed through that embarrassment phase with old television, or perhaps I just don't care what other people think. But I'm less conscious of the sort of boring, the set's wobbled, or it's that is trotted out again, often, as I alluded to last episode, by people that are paid for a living to know and write about television. Anyway, we are here to, well, I am accentuating the positive. I'm just being negative about the people who don't accentuate the positive. And that's therefore a negative about a negative, which in itself is a positive. Like a cobweb. Yes, the lighting in this this cellar I've mentioned before, and it really does work. And yes, suicide, self-sacrifice is quite a thing that runs through Doctor Who. It's an act of bravery, isn't it, to give your life to save others. And have they done this is where they do the reveal, isn't it? And what a great twist is that? You've got these soldiers from the future who've come to kill. They're Terminators, basically. They've come to do a benign version of what the Terminator does in the Terminator. They've come to kill what they think is a bad guy in order to stop the bad future happening. Whereas the Terminator travels back to kill Sarah Connor. to ensure that the baddies prosper. So the goodies, they're the goodies, sure, but they've just realised that they are the architects of their own destruction. And at least he has the courtesy to call it what does he call it? A temporal paradox? A temporal paradox, which just says, so we can do that. Oh, and this has, of course, got the famous story about the Blinovitch limitation effect, hasn't it? Saying that you can't do something again. Why not? Because of the limitation effect. What's that? Oh no, I've been interrupted before I have to give the explanation, which I think Barry Letts or Terence Dix used as a kind of example of how you could be cheeky, but you would still raise the spectre of why time travel didn't let you do things, more over and over and over again, which actually in the timey-wimey era of the show you could. I think that causes problems for storytelling. I think you can't get too clever with what Doctor Who does with time travel, because then you can use it to conveniently get you out of trouble. Whereas this, the whole point of the story is that is the paradox, which is a nice big shocker, but they can't solve it by keep going to try and go back and change it until they get what they want, which I think is dramatically a bit feeble. So I think you're allowed it in this, because that paradox is allowed to be the sort of plot twist, but they then don't get sort of consumed by the whole time travel thing and make it make time travel the method with which they solve the time travel paradox, apart from just stopping the act. But the Doctor uses that through, persuading Shura and the human interaction, and they have to get back via the controller. So it's more about the people and the dynamics, which is more interesting than sort of silly time travel games in a way. So I think they pitched the time travel right, because Doctor Who doesn't do time travel that often, does it? Time travel gets you to the story and it gets you away from the story, but then you can't ask too many questions about it. And I think you endanger your credibility, because the layman, the person on the street, has always said, when you say about Doctor Who, well, why don't they just travel back in time and stop that happening when something goes wrong? You go, well, you can't. And in Doctor Who at this point, you generally can't. This is the natural conclusion of the controller's journey, and Aubrey Woods does it really well. And it is an interesting performance, because he does do all that theatrical stuff, but he's not like the sort of waxy Dalek ladies. Is that he there is a humanity to him there that is concurrent with this rather avant-garde approach to physicality and vocal delivery, but it works, and it's actually quite touching in places, even though he's got a shiny silver face. And Senior Guard gets a bit of a moment where he gets to do slightly more than guards tend to do in Doctor Who. He gets a bit of a duplicitous character arc, where his sadism and his enjoyment of what he does kind of pays off. It's a nice little unpleasant arc. Although, of course, by within 5 or 10 minutes, he will never have existed to be such a beast. But that's well done. It's you get your parting shot, controller, and Andrew Carr, who I think was also an artist, gets a nice little bit in that good costume. And I think he gets a nice. In this world, it's quite a. Although we know this world gets. Look how far he goes. Look how far he exits, because of the clever depth of field that we've got, because of the way that the sets are positioned. Alex McIntosh at Orderly House. Alex McIntosh. I love the fact that he gets a caption, because this is what we're seeing is also the news report. But Alex McIntosh was a news reporter. So he is one of that rare bevy of people playing themselves, although he's not credited as himself, Alex McIntosh. He's credited as TV presenter, but he was a TV presenter. So that's a nice bit of, I'm going to say verisimilitude. So if you're playing the verisimilitude drinking game. And of course, do we see Miss Paget? Because Jean McFarlane, who plays Miss Paget, is and that's that extra that we just saw opening the door is Glenn Witter, who was in On the Buses. But he's just an extra in this, and I think he'd been one of the Egyptian slaves in Daleks Master Plan. But this person holding the briefcase, who's an extra called Desmond Verini, should be Jean McFarlane, Miss Paget, who we saw in episode 1, who I don't know an awful lot about, but I did find something about her I think she was a model. She was quite tall back in the day, but I think she's no longer with us. But she fell ill during this, so couldn't make the recording for this episode. So although she's credited, and I think she does appear on film, she doesn't take place in the studio. So Miss Paget vanishes, even though she's credited on this. That's an iconic. There's photos of the Daleks and the Ogron coming out the tunnel. It's a really nicely chosen piece of location, that actually, because you can disappear into the inky blackness on film and then reappear on videotape without too much of a jar, and that's quite good because we're suggesting quite a lot of Daleks and Ogrons coming here, and that sort of works. It works less well in the final shootout when because one of the Daleks is a different colour, it's kind of obvious there are 3 Daleks. Everybody does hold their hands quite high aloft when they get killed by the Daleks in this story, and in sort of weird slow motion. Doesn't the Brigadier yell at Styles here, which I rather like. I like it when the Brigadier sort of puts his foot down but remains terribly polite. And doesn't he go, "Get out of this house, sir, you twat." He does that in a bit, I think. Yes, and I'm sure there's a bit in the book where Shura, who's young and in real pain and stuff, I think, doesn't he hug the bomb, and it says it, and Shura had a feeling of not satisfaction but comfort. He's comforted. That's the shot of John Levine that I think is a lovely shot of him. There's a photo of him with him and the radio doing that, and it's a really good pick of Benton. "Now be quiet, sir." I love the Nicholas Courtney pitches everything brilliantly. He's such a charming actor, and so Desmond Verini must have phoned home and gone, "I've got a line. Jean McFarlane's ill. They've given me a line." He must have been delighted. And this is always talked of, this climax, as being slightly disappointing because it's obvious that there are 3 Daleks. But at the moment, as I'm watching it, lots of soldiers, explosions. This is what I want from the unit era. And I remember this is done very well in the special edition that was a passion project for Steve Broster, and he really went to town on it. And I think it's a really good example of what you can do with the DVD range. Although I am watching the episodes as broadcast, and actually this is great. There's loads of Ogres. There's Jean McFarlane. She is tall, isn't she? She's still credited and still in the episode, but she should have been indoors as well. But of course, that was done at a completely different time. I think they got into trouble from the car company because they put decals on the cars and it damaged the cars. This battle is not. I do think the Gold Dalek doesn't help, but I don't think it's as limited as perhaps I was expecting. But I have charged myself with being positive, and I was sort of in mind to anticipate the things that didn't quite work, and I think that worked okay. Yeah, so he's doing I mean, it is an act of self-sacrifice, but actually he's wiped out the future that he comes from anyway. But I still think it's brave. Yeah, and I'm sure he hugs the bomb in the book. I remember that being quite... it was quite strange. Well, no, it worked for me. That it was interesting that I understood that you could be doing a terrible thing and throwing your life away, but it suddenly everything sort of made sense to him. I don't think I've imagined this, but as I say, it's at least 35 years since I read that book. I should think the Target books were a great part of your development of being a Doctor Who fan. If you're from my generation, yeah, you tell him. And hats off to Jimmy Winston and R.I.P. sir. And of course, this episode ends quite abruptly because you're supposed to actually then go back to Unit HQ and have the scene that we had in episode 1, but instead you have this sort of, I mean, it's not downbeat. It's not downbeat, is it? But it's sort of quite on the nose. And the fact that the Doctor Who universe was, on the verge of World War III or whatever, I think is quite hard stuff when you're a kid, and especially with the iconography of World War II and dramas and comic strips and films about World War II were still pretty prevalent, although they'd happened before my lifetime. My mother was born during the Second World War, but grandparents fought in it. It was terrible times, and the idea that there could be another one was absolutely terrifying, and but not entirely out of the question. So to sort of not dangle the carrot, because that suggests we'd want it, but the shadow of that, the sword of the Damocles hanging, was felt grown up and felt pretty scary. So I think the idea of ending on that sort of warning of going, yeah, we've seen what happens if you don't do it, and the idea that politician's gotta get it right, otherwise that terrible dystopian future will happen, flies in the face of that idea we have about the coziness of the Unit family and the Unit era, which I think we would feel that sort of coziness if we had the sort of witty return to the scene from episode 1. Although it does mean that scene from episode 1 is slightly redundant and doesn't quite make sense without the payoff. It is in the book. Read the book. Go read the book. But before that, we need to see what Chris Boyle has liked about episode 4 and overall. And so what am I going to go for episode 4 and for overall? Well, I think overall, because I haven't mentioned it yet, is that bit where Andrew Carr, the chief guard, walks off right into the distance. There's loads of shots like that where, because of the nature of the set, our perspective is played with. So it's more than the set design. It's the depth of the shot, the depth of field, the proportions of the doors to the people, the way that people are framed within doors or disappear right into the back of set. I think that we could even call it art direction. Could we? No, I don't know. Whatever that is, I'm definitely going for. Is that an overall thing, or is that? Yeah, I think that's an overall thing, and also, well, maybe what I've just talked about towards the end there, the fact that Earth is on the verge of World War III. I think that's a riposte to the oft mooted idea that the Pottery era is a little cosy. That's very edgy and obviously done, in the manner of a child-friendly television program. That still felt pretty gutsy to me, and felt that's why I didn't even talk much about the Dalek voices. Peter Messeline, who was Canadian. I don't know much about Oliver Gilbert, but Peter Messeline only died a couple of years ago. My friend Mike in Canada got me his autograph, but I still haven't received it. So it's somewhere there. Anyway, it's the enemies. It's the too many syllables that doesn't quite work. Anyway, that doesn't matter. We are accentuating the positive. So World War Three, and the proportion and depth of the sets and the shooting of them. They're my two things, my episode 4 thing and my bonus thing. What has my friend Chris chosen?
Episode 4 of Day of the Daleks, and I've gone with the revelation that the gorillas were the cause of the future that they were trying to prevent all along. I just think it was incredibly kind of Moffat era. It's so timey-wimey, and it's a bit of a rug pull that even Christopher Nolan will be proud of. So yeah, that's my favourite thing about episode 4.
And the bonus thing?
For my bonus choice, I've gone with the Ogrons. They are basically an army of Bernard Breslau's crossed with Oddbod from Carry On Screaming, with a tiny sprinkling of Planet of the Apes. Has there ever been a slower moving armed force in the universe? They basically fire their guns while stood stock still and just taking all fire. They are incredible. So my bonus choice is the Ogrons.
I can't believe I didn't choose the Ogrons. I'm still happy with the things I chose. I don't think because I nearly chose Alex McIntosh and the verisimilitude that he provided. So I'm glad I pulled back and I think went for something more substantial and interesting. I could have chosen either of Chris's things and I didn't. The Ogrons I feel particularly missed out there because they are a terrific design and they look great. The costumes, Mary Husband's costumes, I think are very, very good. Anyway, so I could have chosen anyway, really enjoyed that. Yeah, when I said something about using time travel being feeble, I wasn't suggesting that Stephen Moffat's use of time travel is feeble storytelling. I put that very badly. I'm very much like Stephen Moffat's writing, but I think I was trying to allude to the fact that I thought this didn't get too carried away in using time travel to get out of the problem caused by time travel. Doesn't matter. Anyway, if I part of me wishes I could go back in time and change what I said, but in a way we know that can cause all sorts of problems, so let's not. But if you can interpret what I say with the generosity with which I try to express myself and sometimes fail, but the generosity of spirit I try to exude, then we're going to do this podcast fine, because this is all about trying to see the good and trying to enjoy the good and trying to watch Doctor Who with an open mind and an open heart and remind ourselves why we like it, particularly as I record this when we're in lockdown, where I go on social media and I see people being mean to each other and accentuating the negative because it's so easy to do, and there's something quite cathartic about that. I just hope here in this little corner of the internet that I'm carving here, that we can remind ourselves why we like Doctor Who, and try and escape from all of the difficult things that are flying around us at the moment in a world that seems to be full of schisms and people up against each other and people and divisiveness and all sorts of things that is the world I stepped out of to look at these cameras and speak into this microphone whilst Doctor Who was on. And I'm going to try and do that, even though I am a cynical, glass half empty, pessimistic sort of person. I'm fighting against my own nature to do this. So please help me. Send some feedback if you like. Send some positive vibes to my mailing list if you can on www.tobyhadoke.com. And let's just try and beat the dark, because we don't want the future to be awful, because frankly, I can't afford the silver makeup. I'll see you for whatever the next story is. Thanks for joining me for this one. It's the first one. If there's things you don't like about this, I'm hoping I'll iron out the kinks. Having just celebrated one of the small faces. And I'll hopefully see you at the next one. Thanks to Chris Boyle, who's a great guy. Do seek out his stuff. I'm gonna have a little bit at the end where he plugs his wares. So please avail yourself of them. I hope that's the other thing this does, is it maybe introduces you to some creative people. I'm very lucky that I've had an outlet, thanks to Doctor Who. But Doctor Who's inspired a lot of creative people, far more creative than I am, and I hope to maybe bring some of them into your orbit, and that as a result of this, if nothing else, you discover them and get their podcasts or art or comedy or whatever it is that they do. Anyway, I seem to have gone on approximately forever. So let's wind up there. Thanks very much. Keep supporting these things if you can, and to you and yours, the very happiest of times and places.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
Oh, I was close with the names of those rebel extras in the book. It's Mark, Joab, and Zando. Mark, Joab, and Zando. I was nearly there.
If you'd like to hear a little bit more from me, but you are too old to enrol on the A-level law course at the FE college that I teach at, but you are a fan of trivia that's liberally punctuated with bad language, then you can tune into my occasional podcast, Chris Boyle Didn't Know That. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, and I'm sure loads of other podcast providers as well. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Chris Boyle downplays his comedy in his intro to these episodes, which is typical of him, but also wrong. He's talented, very friendly, somewhat geeky, and very engaging. And I know you'd be tuned in to what he's saying, so please check him out. He's also got a lovely singing voice and is putting various videos out there on top of his podcasts. Since recording his biog for us, he has rebooted and relaunched his podcast, which now goes under the name Chris Boyle's Mild Life Crisis. Check it out, you'll have fun. Thank you for listening to Happy Times and Places. This was an omnibus edition of Day of the Daleks, in which Monica was played by Valentine Palmer, and your host was me, Toby Hadoke, with special guest Chris Boyle. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to patrons James Blackett, Hugh Buchtman, Susan Christian, Steve Churchill, Paul Cook, Peter Crocker, Dave Curran, Michael Dennis, Tim Dickinson, Pete Dillon Trenchard, Paul Dykes, Andrew East, David Gillespie, Charles Gears, Simon Guerrier, Paul J. Guest, and Siobhan Galichon. The music for this podcast was specially composed by Dave Gates, and the podcast artwork is by Dylan Patterson. And thanks, of course, to everybody else who has been my patron at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. It's sincerely appreciated and slightly flabbergasting. Please do sign up to my mailing list. You'll get monthly updates and goodies if you go to www.tobyhadoke.com and do what you're told there. And if you could rate and review this podcast anywhere you possibly can, but only if you like it, that would be lovely. And if you don't like it and you've listened this far, then you're insane. Don't forget to subscribe to the official Toby Hadoke YouTube channel.